Salvete discipuli. Hello students. I wanted to give us a little bit of background information about the House of Atreus before you settle in to read Thyestes for class. So we've already talked about the House of Atreus way at the beginning of class, earlier this semester before we read the Oresteia, which was the story of Agamemnon and Menelaus and Orestes, Clytemnestra, and what happens to their family. But the story of Thyestes is actually the story of the generation before in this family. And in order to really understand the play, we actually have to get a broad picture of the entire family and how they're all related and how this curse that seems to be visited upon this house originally got started. So really the story of the House of Atreus is about violence, deception, sex, vengeance, and the quest for power, but overwhelmingly, it's about how families hurt one another in the quest for power and the awful consequences that brings. Now, Seneca is going to put his own spin on that, and that thirst for power and that quest for vengeance, and that's what we'll be talking about when we get into Seneca's play. But for now, let's work on a little background information. So you may remember this family tree, and we're going to try to go generation by generation to talk about how this supposed curse really manifested itself in each generation. Now we're going to start with the earliest generation, and in particular, a man named Tantalus. Tantalus is important because he is the speaker of the prologue in Seneca's play. So he's going to introduce the topic and sort of the theme for the play, and his past is really important. So Tantalus, and this comes up in the play a little bit, but just to flesh it out a little bit, Tantalus decided one day that he wanted to test the knowledge of the gods. And what he decided to do was to kill his son, whose name is Pelops, cut him up and cook him and serve him to the gods to see if the gods would recognize the fact that they had been served a human instead of an animal sacrifice. Now, one of the goddesses, whose name is Demeter, actually eats one of Pelops's shoulders before the gods realize what has happened, and they quickly revive Pelops and put him back together and give him an ivory shoulder to replace the one that Demeter accidentally ate. But to punish Tantalus for killing his child and trying to cannibalize his child and for deceiving the gods, they create a special place of punishment for him in the underworld. So Tantalus is constantly being tempted by water and by food that he cannot access. So even though he's really thirsty and there's this beautiful spring of water running near him, every time he reaches out to try to get some water to drink, the water recedes. And if he's hungry and there's, fruit hanging from trees dangling right above him, if he reaches out to grab the fruit, it retracts. So he's constantly being tempted by food and drink he can't have. And this is where we get our word today, tantalize. If something is tantalizing, it comes from this story of Tantalus. Okay, so after Tantalus, we have to go to the next generation, and that's Pelops. Now, Pelops was the reconstituted son of Tantalus, and he fell in love with a young woman named Hippodamia, whose father, Oenomaus, was excessively cruel and essentially wanted to keep Hippodamia for himself. And in order to do that, to keep suitors away from her, he devised this really cruel chariot race, where if he had decreed if any man could beat him in this chariot race, they could marry his daughter. But of course, no man ever did, and Oenomaus made a habit of killing the men who attempted. But Pelops manages to succeed because he bribes Oenomaus's chariot racer to replace the axle of his chariot with a wax axle. So when it begins to heat up as the wheels turn, it melts and the chariot would disintegrate. So during the race, this happens, and Oenomaus is thrown from his chariot and killed. And Pelops actually wins the right to marry Hippodamia, but in order to cover his tracks, he kills the chariot driver who fixed the race, so to say. And as the chariot driver is falling off of this cliff that Pelops has pitched him off of, he curses Pelops and curses his whole family. So we now have a second generation that has severely disappointed the gods, so to say, and has flouted divine and human laws. So Pelops is the father of Atreus and Thyestes, and this generation is the one that we are going to be most concerned with in the story of Thyestes. So Atreus and Thyestes were brothers, and they were, for a time, the kings of the city of Mycenae. They committed murder together and had to leave home and were taken in at Mycenae, and Atreus becomes the king there, and he marries one of the princesses whose name is Irope. Now, Irope, kind of legitimizes his kingship, but there's also a kind of magical object that serves as the symbol of his kingship, which is the golden fleece. So it's not quite the same golden fleece that Jason has to go find, but it is a similar golden fleece. So this is a very special object to Atreus. Now, Thyestes seduces Irope, so he has sex with his brother's wife, and he steals the golden fleece. That was this very critical sign of Atreus's kingship. Atreus manages to recover his wife and recover his fleece, but he banishes his brother Thyestes. Even though Thyestes has been banished, and in the meantime manages to impregnate his own daughter with a young son named Aegisthus, whom we'll come back to, and he's banished with his other 3 sons. Atreus still, for some reason, wants to take vengeance on Thyestes. And this is the story of Seneca's play Thyestes. So I don't want to say too much about it, but what I will say is that he fakes reconciliation and invites Thyestes and his 3 sons back to Mycenae, suggesting that they'll find a way for Thyestes to be reincorporated into the city. And this does not happen. Bad things happen, in fact. And the play ends with Atreus and Thyestes still alive, and with Aegisthus, this young son of Thyestes by his own daughter, also being a very little boy at the time of the resolution of the play. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward a bit to the generation you're a little bit more familiar with, which is Agamemnon and Menelaus and Aegisthus. So we saw the curse part of this story play out in the Oresteia. But again, just to sort of tie this to Seneca's play, when Atreus wants to reconcile falsely with Thyestes, he sends his own sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus, to find Thyestes and his 3 sort of unnamed sons and bring him back to Mycenae. And Atreus suggests that there might be some concern or some uncertainty about the paternity of Agamemnon and Menelaus, because remember, Thyestes sleeps with Atreus' wife Irope. So Atreus suggests that he's not completely secure in the fact that Agamemnon and Menelaus are his sons. But if they do this thing for him, he suggests that this might kind of put them in his good graces. When they bring Thyestes back to Mycenae, and Aegisthus, as a young boy, comes along. Even though he's not in the play, he does kind of exist in the same mythical world. Menelaus and Agamemnon and Aegisthus are all brought up together. And what winds up happening is that Aegisthus is sort of nurtured by his father, Thyestes, to be the avenger of this hardship and this awfulness that Atreus does to Thyestes. And he kills, Aegisthus kills Atreus and banishes Agamemnon and Menelaus, and he becomes the king. So there's a difficulty here where, again, we have these brothers who are exiled. So they go to other cities and make advantageous marriages. So Agamemnon marries Clytemnestra, and Menelaus marries Helen. They are sisters. Clytemnestra and Helen are sisters, and they're princesses of Sparta. And then with the support of their new wives' families, they return to Mycenae and banish Aegisthus, and Agamemnon becomes the king there once again. So then we pick up the story where it's a little bit more familiar. Agamemnon and Menelaus are pulled into the Trojan War when Helen is abducted or willfully goes along with Paris to Troy. And the events of the Oresteia kind of come into play. But that's why Aegisthus was banished to begin with. He had killed Agamemnon and Menelaus' father, Atreus, and Atreus in turn had devastated his brother Thyestes, and Thyestes brought his own son up to eventually kill his uncle. So as the story continues, you kind of know the rest. That last generation of the house eventually manages to shake free of the curse. Iphigenia, of course, does not, but Electra and Orestes and Hermione, who's the daughter of Menelaus, and Helen also finds eventually an advantageous marriage with her cousin Orestes. So the curse is lifted once Athena eventually, says to Orestes that it's no longer in effect and you are now going to be welcomed back into Greek society. But the story is a little important, that especially that middle part about why Thyestes and Atreus are fighting to begin with and what the fallout of their relationship is. It does become important to understand for Seneca's Thyestes. All right, I hope you enjoy reading the play.